I thought the worst moment of my life was lying in that hospital bed, staring at the ceiling tiles while machines beeped steadily beside me. I was wrong. The worst moment came 48 hours later, when my mother-in-law walked through that door in her cream wool coat, sat down in the chair beside me without asking, and slid a manila folder onto my blanket with the calm of someone who had been planning this for a very long time. "Sign these," she said. "It's better for everyone." Inside the folder were divorce papers, fully prepared, notarized, with a pen already clipped to the top. What Margaret Calloway did not know, could not have known because she had never once bothered to understand who I actually was that the moment I signed my name on those papers, I didn't lose everything. She did. Every carefully constructed plan she had spent 3 years building collapsed in the space of a single signature. And by the following morning, her son's family stood to inherit practically nothing. But to understand how that happened, you have to understand how we got to that hospital room in the first place. My name is Claire Donovan, Claire Whitfield now, though not for much longer as it turned out. I married Daniel Whitfield 6 years ago in a small ceremony in the garden of my grandmother's house in Connecticut, under an oak tree that had been there for 112 years. I remember the light that afternoon, late September, golden and low, the kind that makes everything look like a painting of itself. Daniel cried when he saw me walking toward him. I thought that meant something. I was 31 years old, and I believed in people completely. I should say something honest here. Daniel was not a bad man. I want to be precise about that, because the story that follows might make him sound like one, and the truth is more complicated and therefore more painful. He was a good man with a serious weakness, and that weakness had a name, and the name was Margaret. Margaret Whitfield. She had never changed her name back after her husband Gerald left, because the Whitfield name still carried weight in certain circles, and Margaret cared enormously about weight in certain circles. Was 63 years old, slim, immaculately presented, and possessed of that particular brand of intelligence that applies itself entirely to the acquisition and maintenance of control. She was not cruel in the obvious ways. She never raised her voice. She never said anything that could be quoted back to her unfavorably. She operated through suggestion, through implication, through the careful placement of small doubts, like someone seeding a garden with something that would take years to fully bloom. She had opinions about where Daniel and I should live, about how we should spend money, about whether my career, I was a corporate attorney, senior associate at a firm in the city, was sustainable for a family. She expressed these opinions gently, always framed as concern, always prefaced with, "I just worry," or "I only want what's best for both of you." Daniel heard them as love. I heard them as architecture, the slow, patient construction of a structure designed to hold us both inside it. Our house was the first real battleground, though I didn't recognize it as such at the time. We bought it in our second year of marriage, a 4-bedroom Victorian in Westport, substantial but not ostentatious, with a wraparound porch and a kitchen that needed updating, and a backyard that became mine the moment I saw it. I paid 60% of the down payment from money I had saved since my first year of practice. Daniel paid 40% from a fund his mother had set up for him, which I learned only after the sale had closed. I remember the small, cold feeling that came with that information. Not suspicion exactly, more like the faint awareness of a draft from a door you hadn't noticed was open. "Mother just wanted to contribute," Daniel said. "She's generous. It's how she shows love." "She could have told us before the closing," I said. "Claire." He used that tone, the one that meant, "You're being difficult about something that doesn't require difficulty. She helped us, that's all." I let it go. I was good at letting things go in those years. I had been trained by 3 years of marriage to Margaret-adjacent situations to pick my battles carefully, and the house was ours, and the backyard was mine, and the kitchen would eventually get its renovation, and I told myself that the draft from the unseen door was nothing to worry about. I was wrong about that, too. The pregnancy was planned, We had talked about it for 2 years, agreed on timing, agreed on everything the way people agree on things when they are still largely happy and still largely trusting each other's good faith. I found out in November, on a Tuesday morning, standing in our bathroom with the window fogged from my shower and the test in my hand. I stood there for a long time just looking at it. I called Daniel first. He was at the office, and I heard his voice change the moment I told him. That particular quality of joy that bypasses performance entirely, that just is. "Claire," he said, "just my name." That was enough. I called my mother second. She cried. I cried. We stayed on the phone for 40 minutes talking about nothing and everything. I did not call Margaret. I told Daniel we should tell her together, in person, over dinner. He agreed. We planned it for the following Sunday. On Saturday morning, Margaret called Daniel. He took the call in the kitchen while I was reading in the living room, and I was not listening. Truly not listening. I was absorbed in my book. But at some point, the tone of his voice changed enough that my attention drifted toward it involuntarily, the way attention does when something in the peripheral environment shifts. "Mom, we were going to tell you together," I heard him say. Then, "I just mentioned it to Tyler. I didn't think he'd—" Then a long silence while Margaret spoke. Then, I know, we'll talk Sunday." He came into the living room looking sheepish in the specific way that meant Margaret had expressed disappointment. "She already knows," he said. "Tyler told her. I mentioned it to him Thursday." Tyler was Daniel's brother. Tyler was also, though I did not yet fully appreciate this, an extension of Margaret's information network, her eyes in rooms she wasn't in, her ears in conversations she wasn't part of. "She's not upset about the baby," Daniel said quickly. "She's upset she didn't hear it from us first." "She's upset she didn't hear it from you first?" I said. "Claire, that's not a criticism. That's just accurate." He didn't answer. The sheepish look deepened into something more uncomfortable. That particular discomfort of a man who knows his wife is right and also cannot fully bear to agree. We went to Margaret's for dinner Sunday. She had prepared a roast and set the table with the good china and hugged me at the door with warm, enveloping arms and said, "Congratulations, sweetheart," in a voice that was entirely convincing. Over dinner, she talked about names, about the guest room she was already planning to convert, about how she had kept all of Daniel's baby furniture just in case. I smiled and ate the roast and tried not to calculate too precisely how the guest room conversion fit into a larger architectural plan. The pregnancy was smooth for 4 months. Then it wasn't. I won't dwell long on the medical details because they are mine and they are private, and this story is not about what I lost. It is about what I refused to surrender. What I will say is this. At 17 weeks, something went wrong. I was admitted to Mercy General on a Wednesday afternoon. Daniel was with me, and for those first hours he was entirely present, holding my hand, talking to doctors, not leaving the room. I remember being grateful for that. I remember thinking, this is who he is underneath everything. This is why I married him. Margaret arrived Thursday morning. Daniel had called her Wednesday night. Of course he had. She was his mother, and this was a crisis. I understood that. What I did not expect was for her to arrive with Tyler at 8 in the morning, before the doctors had made their rounds, before Daniel and I had had a single hour alone together since the previous afternoon. She took charge of the room in the way she took charge of all rooms, not loudly, but comprehensively. She spoke to the nurses. She rearranged the flowers someone had sent. She produced food from a bag she had brought and told Daniel to eat. She sat in the chair by the window and directed the space with the quiet authority of a woman who has never once doubted her right to be the most important person present. I lay in the bed and watched this, and felt something I hadn't felt in 6 years of knowing her. Not irritation, not the familiar, careful management of boundaries, but something colder and more clarifying, something that said, "Pay attention." She stayed all day Thursday. She stayed all day Friday. Daniel slept in the chair by my bed Thursday night. Friday night, Margaret suggested he go home and rest. "You need to be strong for Claire, darling. You can't do that running on empty." And he went. I watched him go, and I did not say anything, because I was in a hospital bed and not in a position to fight about it, and because I told myself I was being uncharitable. Saturday morning, Daniel arrived at 9. Margaret arrived at 9:15. She had Tyler's wife Sandra with her this time. Sandra, who had always been pleasant to me in a surface way that I had never quite trusted, and who sat in the corner with her phone and said little. At 10:30, Daniel went down to the cafeteria to get coffee. Margaret waited until his footsteps had faded down the corridor. Then she reached into her bag and placed the manila folder on my blanket. I looked at it. I looked at her. She was sitting with perfect posture in the chair beside the bed, cream wool coat, pearl earrings, hands folded in her lap. Her expression was composed in that particular way that had taken me years to read correctly. Not cold exactly, but sealed. The expression of a person who has already had the difficult internal conversation and arrived at a position and is now simply executing. "What is this?" I said. Not a question. "I think you know," she said. I opened the folder. The papers were exactly what I'd known they were the moment I saw the folder. Divorce papers. Complete, professional, thorough. A settlement offer was clipped behind them. The house listed as a marital asset to be sold, proceeds split 50-50. My retirement accounts listed separately and untouched. A figure for spousal support that was technically reasonable and practically insulting. I turned the pages slowly. My hands were steady. I noted that with a distant kind of interest, that my hands were steady. "Daniel doesn't know you're doing this," I said. "Daniel needs help making difficult decisions," she said. "I've always been there to help him. He needs help deciding to divorce his wife while she's in a hospital bed." Claire. Her voice was patient, measured, kind in the way that knives are not kind, but are precise. "You've lost the baby. That changes things. Daniel wants children. You may not be able to give him that now. The doctors have been honest with him about the complications. This is painful, I know, but drawing it out will only be more painful for everyone." I put the papers down on the blanket, smoothed them flat with my palm, looked at the settlement figure again. She's been speaking to my doctors, I thought. She's been in those conversations, when Daniel stepped out, when I was sleeping. "Where is Sandra?" I asked. Margaret glanced at the corner. Sandra looked up from her phone. "She's here for support," Margaret said. "She's here as a witness," I said. A pause. The tiniest flicker behind Margaret's sealed expression, quickly contained. "Sign the papers, Claire," she said. "I'll make sure you're taken care of." I looked at the pen clipped to the top of the folder. Then I looked at Margaret. Really looked at her, in the way I had perhaps never fully allowed myself to before, because looking directly at something that frightens you requires a kind of courage that takes time to develop. I saw her clearly. I saw the plan. I saw the architecture in its entirety, the fund that had paid for part of our house, the 3 years of careful cultivation, the doctor's conversations, Sandra in the corner, the timing chosen with the precision of someone who had been waiting for exactly this vulnerability. I saw it all, and I picked up the pen. I signed. Margaret watched my hand move across the signature line with the focused attention of someone watching a transaction complete, that particular quality of stillness that belongs to people who have been waiting a long time for a specific outcome and are now witnessing it with controlled satisfaction. Sandra, in the corner, put down her phone. I heard the small sound of it, the soft click of the screen going dark, and I knew she had been recording or photographing or doing whatever Margaret had asked her to do to document the moment. I signed my full name, Claire Ann Whitfield. Neat, legible, the signature I had used on legal documents for 15 years of professional practice. Then I closed the folder and held it out to Margaret. "There," I said. "It's done." She took the folder. Something in her face shifted. Not quite a smile, but the precursor to one. The almost smile of a woman who has been proven right by events and is allowing herself one private moment of acknowledgement before reassembling into graciousness. "I know this is hard," she said, "but you'll see." "Margaret," I said, "I'd like you to leave now." She looked at me. "Daniel will be back shortly, and I'd like a few minutes alone before he arrives. Please take Sandra with you." A beat of silence. The almost smile receded. "Of course," she said. She stood, smoothed her coat, picked up her bag. Sandra was already at the door. "I'll give you some privacy." They left. The door closed. I lay in the hospital bed and listened to the machines beside me and the corridor sounds outside, and the particular quality of silence that fills a room after people with intentions have departed. Then I reached for my phone on the bedside table, scrolled to a name I had not called in 8 months. Pressed dial. It rang 3 times. "Claire?" said the voice on the other end. Alert immediately, the way certain people are always alert, regardless of the hour or circumstance. "What's happened?" "Patricia," I said, "I need you." Patricia Hale had been my mentor at the firm for 7 years before she made partner and I made senior associate, and we became something more like colleagues than mentor and mentee, though the original dynamic never fully dissolved. She was 12 years older and had seen considerably more, and there were moments, like this one, when that differential was exactly what I needed. She was also, as it happened, one of the best matrimonial attorneys in the state. Not my specialty, I worked in corporate, but hers, and I had watched her work often enough to understand both her methods and her caliber. I told her everything. It took 11 minutes. She listened without interrupting, which was characteristic. Patricia believed that the first telling of a story contained information that questions would obscure, and she had trained herself to let the first telling complete before she touched it. When I finished, there was a pause. "You signed," she said. "Yes." "With your full legal signature?" "Yes." "And she has the folder?" "She does." Another pause, shorter this time. "And the other document," Patricia said, "the one we prepared last year?" "Still in place," I said. "Nothing has changed on that end." "Good." I heard her exhale, not with relief exactly, but with that particular professional satisfaction of a person who prepared for a contingency and is now watching the preparation prove its value. "All right, here's what I need you to do." I should explain the other document. I should explain how it came to exist, because it did not come from nowhere, and understanding it requires going back 14 months to a Tuesday evening in October when I came home from work to find Margaret in my kitchen. Not at the door, not on the porch, in my kitchen, at my counter, with a cup of tea she had made from my kettle, with my tea, reading something on her phone with the relaxed propriety of a person in her own home. Daniel was not there. He was at a work dinner. I knew this. Margaret knew I knew this. The door was unlocked, she said, when she heard me come in, pleasantly, without embarrassment. "I hope you don't mind. I was in the area and wanted to drop off those casseroles I mentioned." 2 casserole dishes sat on my counter, covered in foil. I looked at them. I looked at her. I was very tired from a 12-hour day, and I had been looking forward to 45 minutes alone before Daniel came home. And instead, I was standing in my kitchen, looking at my mother-in-law who had let herself into my house while I was at work. "How did you get in?" I said. "Daniel gave me a key ages ago," she said. "For emergencies." "This isn't an emergency," I said. She looked at me with that sealed expression, patient, slightly puzzled, as though I were reacting disproportionately to a neutral event. "Claire, I was just dropping off food. I do it for Daniel all the time." I did not say what I wanted to say. I said, "I'd appreciate it if you called ahead in future." And I put my bag down and poured a glass of water and stood at my own counter until she finished her tea and left. That night, after Daniel came home and we had the conversation, the careful, circling conversation that had become our primary mode of discussing Margaret, where both of us said measured things and avoided the larger territory, I lay awake for a long time. I thought about the key. I thought about for emergencies. I thought about the fund that had paid for part of our house, the fund I hadn't known about until after closing. I thought about the doctor's appointments Margaret had attended with Daniel, and the financial conversations she had inserted herself into, and the slow, patient way the architecture had been built around us for 3 years. And I thought, I am a corporate attorney. I understand contracts. I understand the way documents shape outcomes and the way the absence of documents shapes them differently. I have spent 15 years learning that the time to protect yourself is before the crisis, not during it. The following week, I called Patricia. We met for lunch. I told her what I had observed and what I suspected and what I wanted to do about it. She listened with the same careful attention she had always given me, and then she said, "You understand that if you're wrong about her intentions, none of this matters. And if you're right, it matters enormously." "I know," I said. "Then let's be thorough," said Patricia. What we prepared over the following 2 months was not dramatic. It was not clever in the showy way that things are clever in films. It was thorough, which is a different quality and a more durable one. The first element was a post-nuptial agreement, not the standard document, but a specifically structured one that addressed the house in granular detail. I had contributed 60% of the down payment. That 60% came from savings that were entirely documentably mine, premarital, earned, traceable to specific accounts over specific years. The post-nuptial agreement formalized my ownership stake accordingly. It also included language about the fund Margaret had contributed, language that characterized it as a gift to Daniel specifically, not a marital asset, which meant it would return to Daniel in any dissolution rather than being split, which meant it would not dilute my position. Daniel had signed it. This was important. He had signed it, willingly, in front of witnesses, after reading it with his own attorney, a mild, careful man named Robert Finch, who had gone over every clause and told Daniel it was fair and standard, and Daniel had agreed because he was, at that point in our marriage, still operating in good faith and saw no reason not to. Margaret had not known about it. This was a choice I had made deliberately and kept deliberately, not from Daniel, who knew, but from Margaret. Because Margaret knew everything that Daniel knew, and I wanted this particular thing to remain outside her architecture. The second element was simpler, a formal review of the house's title documentation, conducted quietly, that confirmed the property's ownership structure in terms that would survive scrutiny. The third element was a conversation with my own financial advisor, separate from our joint advisor, who I had reason to believe reported informally to Daniel, and therefore potentially to Margaret, that restructured certain of my personal accounts in ways that were entirely legal and entirely invisible to anyone who was not me or Patricia. I had not planned to use any of this. I had hoped, genuinely, never to need it. I had prepared it the way you prepare emergency documents, not because you intend the emergency, but because the preparation is itself a form of sanity in uncertain terrain. Now, lying in a hospital bed with machines beeping beside me, I was very glad I had been thorough. Daniel came back from the cafeteria at 11. He came through the door with 2 coffees and a muffin he had bought because he knew I hadn't eaten, and he looked at my face and stopped. "What's wrong?" he said. Not a question, a recognition. "Sit down," I said. He sat, put the coffees on the table, looked at me with that open expression he had when he was genuinely present, the one that reminded me of the garden, the oak tree, the September light. "Your mother was here," I said. Something moved through his face. I watched it. "She mentioned she might stop by," he said carefully. "She brought divorce papers." Silence. "She asked me to sign them," I said, "while you were getting coffee, with Sandra there as a witness." The silence continued. It was a specific quality of silence, not the silence of surprise exactly, more the silence of a man confronting something he had told himself was not happening and is now unable to maintain that position. "Claire," he started. "Did you know?" I said. "No, I didn't. She mentioned she thought we should think about, but I didn't tell her to. Did you know she had papers prepared?" He looked at the coffee cups. A long time. She mentioned she'd spoken to someone, he said quietly. A lawyer. I told her it wasn't her place. I thought she'd dropped it. I looked at him. At the man I had married under an oak tree in September light, who had cried when he saw me walking toward him, who had come back from the cafeteria with a muffin because he knew I hadn't eaten. Daniel, I said. I signed them. His head came up. You signed? Yes. He stared at me. I watched the sequence move through him. Shock first, then something more complicated, then something I couldn't fully read. Claire, you didn't have to. I wasn't going to. She had no right. I know she had no right, I said. I signed anyway. Why? I reached for my phone, opened my email, turned the screen to face him. Because 20 minutes ago, I sent Patricia Hale the signed papers along with a formal notification of the postnuptial agreement we signed 14 months ago, which your mother doesn't know about, which means the settlement offer she had prepared is void because it was calculated without accounting for our actual ownership structure. I paused. Patricia is filing the postnuptial as the governing document for the dissolution. Your mother's version of the settlement, the one with the house split 50-50, isn't going to hold. Daniel was very still. The house, he said slowly. My 60% of the down payment, formally documented, gives me a 60% ownership stake, which is what the postnuptial reflects, which means in the sale, I receive 60% of the proceeds. I held his gaze. Plus, the fund your mother contributed is characterized as a gift to you specifically, not marital property. So it returns to you, not to the split, which means your mother's fund, which she contributed in order to have a stake in this house, reverts to you and not to her plans for it. He was quiet for a long moment. She thought she could control the outcome, he said. It wasn't quite a question. She's been controlling outcomes for 3 years, I said. This one she didn't prepare for, because she didn't know about the document, because I didn't tell her. Another silence. The machines beeped. Somewhere down the corridor, a cart wheeled past. I didn't ask her to do this, Daniel said. His voice was low. I want you to know that. I believe you. But I knew she'd spoken to someone, and I didn't stop it. And I let her come here today. He looked at the table. That's the same thing, isn't it? Not the same act, but the same thing. I thought about all the times I had watched him not stop things. Not stop the key. Not stop the casseroles. Not stop the doctor's conversations. The architecture built one small, uncontested element at a time. Yes, I said, it is. He didn't defend himself. That was something. Perhaps the most honest thing he had done in a long time. He sat with it, in the way that people sometimes sit with things they cannot fix, but can at least stop pretending aren't true. What happens now, he said. Patricia files the postnuptial today. The dissolution proceeds under its terms. Your mother's settlement offer is superseded. I paused. And I go home when the doctors discharge me. And I live my life. And we do this correctly and legally and without your mother's involvement. She's going to be, I know what she's going to be, I said. That's no longer my concern. Margaret called Daniel at 2 that afternoon. I knew because I heard his phone ring and saw him step into the corridor to take it. And I heard, not the words, but the shape of the conversation through the closed door. Her voice audible as a pattern of sound, rising and sharp in places, and his voice lower, steadier than I expected, saying things I couldn't parse, but that did not sound like capitulation. He came back after 12 minutes, sat down. I told her what the postnuptial means for the settlement, he said. She's upset. I imagine she is. She says you deceived her. I looked at him carefully. I prepared a legal document with my attorney and my husband's knowledge and consent, I said. I chose not to inform my mother-in-law. That's not deception. That's privacy. He nodded slowly. I told her that. How did she take it? She hung up. Sandra called 20 minutes later. I heard the ringtone Danielle had assigned her, a different one, and watched him look at the screen for a moment before declining it. Tyler called after that. Daniel declined that too. Then Margaret called again. He looked at the screen for longer this time. Then he put the phone face down on the table. "I'll deal with it later," he said. It was a small thing, a phone placed face down. But I had watched Daniel Whitfield fail to place things face down for 6 years, and I knew what it cost him, and I noted it. Not with hope. I was past the geography of hope regarding our marriage, and I was honest enough with myself to know it. But with a kind of precise acknowledgement, the way you acknowledge facts that are true regardless of what you do with them. Patricia called at 4. "The filing is in," she said. "The postnuptial is on record. Their attorney," she retained someone this afternoon, it happened fast, she was prepared for resistance, which tells us something. "Their attorney has been notified. They're going to challenge the postnuptial on the grounds that Daniel signed under duress." "He signed in front of Robert Finch with 3 weeks to review," I said. "I know, it won't hold, but it'll take time." A pause. "Claire, I need to tell you something else." "Tell me." "I pulled the property records while I was preparing the filing. The fund Margaret contributed to your down payment, the 40% of Daniel's share, it was not a personal gift. It came from a family trust, a trust with specific conditions attached, one of which is that assets contributed to third-party property retain a reversionary interest." I was quiet for a moment. "Meaning?" "Meaning Margaret's attorney is going to argue that the trust retains a claim on the portion of the house purchased with trust funds, which is Daniel's 40%. Another pause. "Which means in a contested dissolution, there could be a 3-way ownership dispute between you, Daniel, and the trust, which Margaret controls." I thought about this, about the fund she had contributed, about the deliberate timing of that contribution, after the sale, after the commitment was made, when it was too late to decline gracefully, about the architecture. "She planned for the trust claim all along," I said. "Almost certainly. The reversionary interest clause is standard in that trust, but you'd only know to invoke it if you'd been planning to invoke it. She was always planning to invoke it." "What does that mean for my position?" "Your 60% is clean, not from trust funds, fully documented. The postnuptial is airtight. Your 60% is yours." Patricia's voice was steady, the voice of someone delivering a complex situation with clarity. "But Daniel's 40% is going to be in litigation, which means the sale of the house, if it happens, is going to be complicated. And whatever Daniel walks away with is going to be substantially less than he thinks, because the trust is going to claim its reversionary interest." Silence. "She did this to her own son," I said. "She did it to you," Patricia said. "He was collateral." I was discharged on a Monday. Daniel drove me home. We didn't talk much in the car, not from hostility, but from that particular exhaustion that settles over people who have said the important things and don't yet know what comes next. The city moved past the windows in its ordinary way, indifferent to the fact that everything had changed. Traffic lights, a woman walking a dog, a delivery truck idling at a corner. All of it unchanged, all of it continuing. The house looked the same from the street. Wraparound porch, Victorian detail, the oak in the front yard that was smaller than my grandmother's but had the same quality of permanence. I had loved this house the moment I saw it. I still loved it. That hadn't transferred to any other column. Some things you love independent of what happens inside them. Daniel carried my bag in, made tea without asking, put it on the kitchen counter, and stood there with his hands in his pockets, looking at a point on the floor that wasn't anything. "She wants to meet," he said. "Margaret. She called this morning. She wants to sit down with both of us." "No," I said. He looked up. "Not both of us," I said. "If she wants to meet with you, that's your decision. I'm done being in rooms with your mother." He nodded, slowly, the way he had been nodding since the hospital, not with reluctance, but with a new, careful quality, like someone learning a different way to move through space. "I think I need to meet with her," he said. "Alone. There are things I need to say to her." "That's between you and her." "I know," He paused. "I'm not asking your permission. I'm telling you because—" He stopped, started again. "I'm trying to be honest with you about what I'm doing and why. I know I should have been doing that for years. I'm trying to start now, even though I understand it's probably too late." I looked at him, at the man I had married, who was standing in our kitchen being more honest with me than he had been in 3 years at the worst possible moment, when it was almost certainly too late for it to change anything structural. "It's not too late to be honest," I said. "It's too late for some other things, but not for that." He nodded again, picked up his own tea. We stood in the kitchen and drank it in silence, and it wasn't a bad silence. It was the silence of two people who have stopped pretending, which is its own kind of relief, even when everything around it is broken. He met Margaret on Wednesday, at her house, without me, for 2 hours. He told me about it that evening. Not everything, I could tell, but enough. He had told her that what she had done in the hospital was a violation of me, of him, of the marriage she claimed to want to protect. He had told her that he had known about the attorney she'd consulted, and that his failure to stop her was his failure, and he wasn't pretending otherwise, but that her actions in that hospital room were hers alone, and she would need to own them. He had told her about the trust claim, that Patricia had found it, that it was on record, that her plan to use the reversionary interest clause as leverage had been identified and would be contested. "How did she respond?" I asked. "She cried," he said, "for a while. Then she stopped crying and told me I was being manipulated by you." Of course. I told her that a woman who prepares a legal document with her own attorney and her husband's signed consent is not manipulating anyone. She's practicing law. A pause. I used those exact words. I thought you'd want to know that. I appreciate it. She didn't take it well. I imagine not. He was quiet a moment. She's going to pursue the trust claim. Her attorney told her she has standing. It's going to be a fight. Patricia knows, I said. We're ready for it. He looked at me with that open expression, the September light one, the one I had once believed in completely and now believed in differently, with more precision and less surrender. I'm sorry, Claire, he said, for all of it, for the specific things and for the general shape of things. I know that doesn't fix anything. No, I said, it doesn't. But I mean it. I know you mean it, I said. That's always been the hard part with you, Daniel. You always meant things. You just didn't act on them. He had no answer for that. It was true, and we both knew it. And sitting with true things that have no answer is one of the lonelier human experiences. I watched him sit with it, and I felt something. Not forgiveness, not quite, but something adjacent to it. Something that recognized him as a person who had failed in specific and damaging ways, and who was also not the architect of what had happened. He was the material the architect had used. That was its own kind of tragedy. The trust claim took 4 months to resolve. Margaret's attorney argued that the reversionary interest clause in the family trust entitled the trust, and therefore Margaret as its controller, to a claim on the portion of the house purchased with trust funds. It was not a frivolous argument. It had legal standing. It was also, as Patricia had anticipated, ultimately unsuccessful. The reason it failed was not complicated. It failed because the trust's own documentation, when examined fully, contained a provision that the reversionary interest could only be invoked in cases of dissolution, where the trust's contribution had been disclosed to all parties at the time of the property purchase. It had not been disclosed. Not to me, not in writing, not at closing, not before closing, not at any point during the transaction. Daniel had known about the fund, but the specific trust conditions, the reversionary clause, the legal structure underneath Margaret's generosity, had never been communicated to either of us in any documentable form. Patricia found this in the 4th week of the dispute, on a Thursday afternoon, and called me while I was at my desk. It's over, she said. The non-disclosure kills the claim. They cannot invoke a condition they never disclosed. I sat with the phone in my hand for a moment. "She built a trap for me," I said, "and the trap had a flaw she didn't know was there." "She built it to be invisible," Patricia said. "Invisible structures tend to have uninspected foundations." The house sold in the spring. I received 60% of the proceeds. Daniel received 40%, unencumbered, because the trust claim had failed. Margaret received nothing from the sale, because the trust's claim was void, and because Daniel, in the weeks following the hospital, had taken several quiet and significant steps to restructure his own relationship with the family trust in ways that his attorney had recommended and Margaret had not anticipated. This last part I learned not from Daniel directly, but from Patricia, who heard it from Robert Finch, the mild, careful attorney who had apparently found the whole situation professionally clarifying in ways that moved him to be unusually forthcoming. Daniel had not acted against his mother vindictively. I want to be precise about that, because precision matters, and I will not give Margaret the satisfaction of having turned her son into a villain, even in my account of things. He acted practically. He removed himself, legally and financially, from structures that had been designed to keep him inside them. That was not revenge. That was simply a man finally doing the thing he should have done years earlier, standing on his own ground. What Margaret was left with, at the end of it, was less than she had started with. Not dramatically, she was not destitute, she was not ruined in any cinematic sense. But the trust's failed claim had triggered a review of its other provisions, which revealed several instances of management that her own co-trustee, Tyler, who had spent the preceding months quietly reassessing his position, found difficult to defend. Tyler retained his own attorney. Margaret retained a second attorney to manage the trust dispute on top of the dissolution dispute. The legal costs were substantial. The control she had exercised for so long over Daniel's financial life was gone. The stake she had planned to hold in our house was gone. The settlement she had crafted so carefully in that manila folder, the one with the pen clipped to the top, placed on my hospital blanket with such composed certainty, had been superseded entirely by a document she hadn't known existed, prepared by a woman she had consistently underestimated. Patricia told me about the trust review on a Friday afternoon. I was in my new apartment by then, smaller than the house, higher floor, a view of the park that I had come to value for its seasonal honesty, the way it showed you exactly where you were in the year without editorializing. It was May. The park was fully green, extravagantly so, the way things are green in May when winter has been long. "Is it finished?" I asked. "The dissolution is final," Patricia said. "The trust matter will run a while longer, but it doesn't involve you. You're out." "Good. How are you?" I looked at the park, at the May green, at a woman below pushing a stroller along the path, with the deliberate enjoyment of someone who has nowhere specific to be and is glad of it. "I'm all right," I said, and I meant it. Not as a social formula, not as the reflexive reassurance I had offered people for months, but as an accurate statement of current condition. I was all right. Not happy in any complete sense, not finished with grief, not pretending that what I had lost was not worth grieving, but all right, functional, present, inhabiting my own life in a way that felt, for the first time in years, entirely mine. "You know what the remarkable thing is?" Patricia said. She came to that hospital room with everything prepared. The papers, the witness, the settlement, the trust claim waiting in reserve. She had thought of everything. "Almost everything," I said. "Almost everything," Patricia agreed. "She never thought you'd prepared too." I spoke to Daniel once more in June, not in person, by phone, briefly. He was moving to a smaller place across town. He sounded tired, and also, underneath the tiredness, something lighter. The way people sound when they have set down something heavy and are still registering the absence of the weight. We talked for 11 minutes. We did not talk about Margaret, or the house, or the hospital. We talked about ordinary things, his new apartment, my work, a book we had both read years ago that I happened to mention. It was not painful. It was not warm. It was the conversation of two people who had known each other well and would know each other differently now, if at all, and were managing that fact with mutual decency. Before he hung up, he said, "I hope you're okay, Claire. Genuinely." "I am," I said. Genuinely. "Good." A pause. "You were always the most prepared person I knew. I just didn't understand what that meant until it was too late." I didn't answer that. There wasn't an answer that wasn't either too kind or too honest. And I had learned over the preceding months to leave spaces where no answer was required. We said goodbye. I put the phone down and stood at my kitchen window and looked at the May sky, which was doing that particular evening thing where the blue goes deep and clear right before the light shifts, the hour when everything is briefly and perfectly itself. 12 months after the hospital. I was sitting at my desk on a Tuesday when my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't open it. I'm glad I did. "This is Tyler. I don't expect a response. I just wanted to say that what my mother did was wrong, and I should have said that a long time ago. I hope you're well." I read it twice, thought about it. Then I typed back, "Thank you, Tyler. I appreciate it." I put the phone down, went back to work. Not everything requires a longer answer. Some things are complete in themselves. A small acknowledgement, a door briefly opened, the recognition that even in families organized around control, there are people who eventually look up and see what they've been part of, and find it uncomfortable enough to say so. That was enough. The oak tree in my grandmother's garden is still there. I know because I visited her in September, on the anniversary of the wedding. Not deliberately. I had planned the visit months earlier and only registered the date when I arrived, and walked into the garden and stood under it. It was the same light, that September gold, low and patient, the kind that makes everything look like a painting of itself. I stood there for a while, thought about the woman who had stood in this same light 6 years ago and believed in people completely. I didn't feel sorry for her. She had been doing what people do at 31 in September light, which is to believe. And believing is not a mistake even when it costs you. What you do after the belief is tested is where the story actually lives. My grandmother came out with tea, sat beside me in the garden. We didn't talk about any of it. She knew the outline, not the details, and she was a woman who understood that some things are for sitting with, not dissecting. "You look well," she said. "I feel well," I said. "Good," she poured the tea. "That's the thing about difficult years. If you get through them right, you come out better than you started." I thought about the postnuptial in its folder, about Patricia's voice on the phone saying, "It's over," about the park in May and the woman with the stroller, and the deep blue of the evening sky, about Tyler's text and the 11-minute phone call, and the house that was sold now, its proceeds cleanly distributed, its chapter closed, about a hospital room and a manila folder and a pen clipped to the top, and a mother-in-law who had prepared everything except the one woman who had prepared more. "Yes," I said, "I think that's right." We drank our tea in the September garden. The oak tree stood above us, 112 years old, unbothered. The light did what the light does in September, held everything gently, and then, slowly, let it go.